A new level of ambition and excellence thrives at the Texas Tech System. A $2 billion higher education enterprise with 4 diverse and distinguished universities. Because from here, it's possible.
Join the fight. Help us keep Noscala Gaming open.
I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. I am not on this panel, but I am here because I love this program, love all the things on this program, but I think this is an issue that is so unbelievably important, and we have averted our eyes, allowed ourselves to move on to other things, and the Tribune doesn't believe in that. We think this issue is very important, and so we're going to keep everybody's eyes and everybody's focus on this issue. Before we begin, let me tell you that the University of Texas is winning 19-0. Tom Herman, at least, has reunited the Longhorn family for the moment. This humanitarian crisis on the border is the story of our lives and of our lifetimes. And it demands attention, it requires thought, and it requires the eyeballs of the entire country on it consistently, persistently, no stopping. And so, as I said, we're going to continue to have conversations around this subject, and the best of all possible places to do that is here. And thank you very much for being here and being a part of it. The Tribune's mission is to educate and inform Texans, to make Texas a better place by making Texans better informed and more engaged. Smarter Texas is a better Texas. On this issue, the only way forward is forward, and forward means getting people to think and talk about this policy and the lives of these real people who, again, we've started not to pay attention to because we've moved on to other topics. So help us keep the focus on this. Be respectful to one another and to the panelists when it comes time to answer questions. Thank you to the Alabama Cushata for presenting this program. Sponsors, along with individuals and foundations, make it possible for the Tribune to do its great accountability journalism that holds people in power and institutions accountable for 9 years. And thank you to all of you who are members of the Texas Tribune. If you're not a member, please consider becoming a member. You know why. I'll let our moderator and panelists come on stage. We are getting down to the wire with this festival. Thank you so much for coming. Please come back next year. There will be a next year. It will be downtown, and it will be awesome. Thanks so much.
Were you, Julián?
They had asked me to be stage left. Sorry to bump you out.
I can sit on the end.
Off to a bad start. He gets here early and doesn't even get the best seat in the house, right? Well, folks, good afternoon. Thank you all very much for being here. We know that there are plenty of things that you could do on a Saturday afternoon. You know, go see some music, sleep in, watch the Longhorns game, you know, but you guys are here at the Tribune Festival, our 8th annual Tribune Festival, and we're very, very happy that you guys made it out. This is, to speak personally, this is a panel on family separations in the immigration debate, and in my 14 or 15 years of journalism, this is probably one of the most challenging stories on both sides to listen to these stories and to try to tell it accurately. But thankfully, we have 4 experts in the field that are going to lend their insights. One programming note: Representative Jeff Leach was also scheduled to be here, but he declined. He opted out at the last minute, but we won't miss a beat with our panelists. So just a couple of housekeeping issues. Is this a little high here? All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so this panel is presented by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and it's supported by the Alabama Coshawta Tribe of Texas. We appreciate their support, but that doesn't mean that they have any influence on our content or our coverage of this issue. We are strictly nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we're proud to be that way. We'll have about a 40-minute discussion on the topic that I'll moderate, and after that, I'll give you guys a heads up, and we'll start taking questions from the audience. They'll be right here? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'll flag that for you, and you guys can start lining up. And there's also a meet and greet immediately after this if you guys kind of want to hang out and mingle for a little bit and talk to our panelists a little bit more, you know, and to get some more details about where they stand on this issue. So without further delay, let me just do a quick introduction and we'll get going. Mr. Daniel Garza, he is the founder of the Libre Initiative and the Libre Institute, which are two nonprofits that work to inform and empower the U.S. Hispanic community. Anybody that keeps up with demographic changes know that that's a up-and-coming demographic. You know, everybody says the Latino vote is a sleeping giant, but you know, some people also say they've been hitting the snooze button for a really, really long time. So Mr. Garza works on these policy issues. Celina Moreno, we're happy to have her back. She was appointed Interim Southwest Regional Counsel for MALDEF in 2017, and where she leads the Office of Litigation and Policy Work. Previously, she was a staff attorney for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and the co-leader of the Texas Residents United for a Stronger Texas. Mr. Noorani, who I'm sorry took his seat, he leads the National Immigration Forum, and he's done that for the last 10 years. Previously, he was the executive director of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Last but not least, Congressman from Brownsville, Mr. Filemon Vela, a Democrat. He has represented the 34th Congressional District since 2013. He also sits on the House Ag and Homeland Security Committees. Thank you all very much for being here, and please, a round of applause for us. So to start off, obviously this is family values, and the topic is how did we get to separating families at the border? And what do we do to make sure that never happens again? So I think we're all correct in the fact that the separation was because the Attorney General, Mr. Sessions, sent out an order saying we're going to have to enforce the United States Code, illegal entry, punishable by jail time. So the de facto result of that was the fact that you separated these families. So this is how it started. But we're assuming that it's ever going to happen again, because a few weeks after that, I think the backlash, the Trump administration realized that this was not good form. So I just want to ask you guys, how confident are we that they're not going to go back to the same program, seeing as how the Trump administration is, love him or hate him, he's making good on his promises that he said he's going to crack down on immigration. So how confident are we that family separations is in the rearview mirror? Mr. Garza, want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Look, I think that the reaction by every American across the board was loud and vociferous, and I think they clearly objected on a humanitarian level. Look, public policy should be about human freedom, to allow the humanity to thrive, right? And that there should be, I think, agency in the individual. And I think this hit to the core because the family unit, you have to have family cohesion as a building block to every society. And what you, in a very real way, you were ripping apart that family unit and causing eternal trauma, both in the mother or the father and the child. And everybody, I think, relates to that. And so the reaction was emotional, was heartfelt. And they understood that right away. And I think they understood really quick they overreached. I don't know who made that decision. Apparently, Secretary was involved in this, Secretary Kirsten Nielsen. Kirsten Nielsen.
DHS Secretary, yes, Kirsten Nielsen.
But that kind of reaction, that outrage, has to be top of mind. I think it has to be consistent. It has to be demonstrated at all times when there's bad policy. So they understand clearly from the American public that when you overreach, you're going to hear from us. And it was conservatives, and it was left, and it was immediately Senator Cruz, Senator Cornyn, and I was in a meeting down in Brownsville where he immediately rejected this kind of policy, and what can we do to solve it right away? So I think the message was heard loud and clear. I don't think it's going to happen again, but we always have to be vigilant.
Celina, if I could add, you've been behind the lines on the immigration fight for years. Are you confident that the outcry that Mr. Garza just mentioned is enough to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or would you put a $20 bet on it?
Well, I think that you've seen what you saw was unprecedented in terms of the outrage, but I do think that who comes to mind is Dr. Satsuki Ina, who herself was born in a Japanese internment camp, came to visit the families that have been separated, the kids, and said it was reminiscent of what she went through. But she was actually in Texas just a couple of years prior on another immigration issue, which was family detention. And so while I do think the level of outrage was unprecedented, There have been, some of these issues are not new. You have women that are coming from Central America that have been traumatized in their home country for violence, traumatized in their journey, and still re-traumatized in abusive detention centers. So I'm not quite as confident because I think the things that we have allowed to happen as a country, while maybe not as outrageous as what we have seen over the last few months, have been occurring. And you saw people like Dr. Ina come and say, these people who are in family detention, this is what I went through. This is the same things that are happening in family detention with kids. This is what I went through as somebody who was born in an internment camp back in World War II.
And just to touch on the fact that this was sort of pitched as a deterrent for families mainly from Central America not to seek asylum here, not to make the dangerous trek through Mexico. And obviously it didn't work because in August of 2018, there were 12,800 family units that were either apprehended or turned themselves into federal officials crossing the border to seek asylum. That's a nearly 40% jump from July. So obviously, if it was pitched as a deterrent, it didn't really work that way. And just to sort of put a broader spotlight on where we are, there were 2,654 children that were separated from their parents after crossing the United States, and about 2,000 have been reunified. And this information, big shout out to my colleague Hannah Wiley, who put this on Twitter just to let you guys know where we are and how many children have yet to be reunited. So on that note, Congressman Vela, Southwest Key has been a big part of this. Some folks, they are running the shelters, some people call them detention centers, what have you, but they play a big role, and obviously there was a lot of news in your neck of the woods in Brownsville about what they're doing. So describe the process, and if you could rate how well these organizations are doing to reunite these families. Are they doing it are they practicing due diligence? Are they taking too long? What is it that you're seeing on the ground there in your district, sir?
It's kind of hard to say in general. I can only speak from my very personal experience and what we're seeing in my congressional office. And by coincidence, about 48 hours ago, a lawyer with the Texas Civil Rights Project called and to let us know that there had been an adult with a child at Southwest Keys, which, by the way, is about 5 minutes from my house.
Sure.
And that had been released, and they were trying to get the child released so the parent and the child could be together. And so they were out there Thursday at Southwest Keys, and when that happens, the practical approach from those of us who are trying to reunite the families is we have our staffs in Washington dealing with Health and Human Service bureaucrats on the Washington side, and then at the local level, kind of hitting it from the other angle, which is at the Southwest Keys and ORR folks. And over the course of about the last 2 months, we've had about 20 or 25 cases just like that.
Okay.
And so, I came in last night to the hotel and was greeted by a picture of my staff and the Texas Civil Rights folks at dinner with the mother and child that had been released. They were from Honduras. So the initial decision that was made caused such chaos, not just with respect to the families in Southwest Keys, but across across all sectors of the immigration system, from U.S. magistrates to the U.S. Attorney's Office to the U.S. Marshal's Office. It was very, very ill-conceived and not really thought through at all. And it created such havoc across the board that, those of us who have constituencies that are involved in it have to address it on a case-by-case basis. And, every time we were able to reunite a family, it was heartwarming to begin with, and it made you feel like you're there for a purpose,
sure,
right?
Sure.
And,
Ali, I want to ask you, obviously we're very Texas-focused here, but you have a broader look at the national perspective. So away from the border, can you describe the ripple effects of how this is this has resonated in places that aren't in the four border states?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I want to really acknowledge the reporting of the Texas Tribune on this issue. You know, so we at the Forum, you know, we follow a lot of news. And I think you and the entire team of the Texas Tribune has just done incredible work in terms of helping the American public understand precisely what is happening along the U.S.-Mexico border. And then the legal services organizations, MALDEF, Texas Civil Rights Projects, and so many others, they're just doing heroic work. I mean, you have NGOs who are literally cold calling families across Central America asking, do you know where your child is?
Right.
And then Daniel and the congressman and you know, the members of Congress have just been relentless in terms of pressuring the administration and their colleagues to really move forward. What's happening across the country is that for the first time ever, you have, I think, the overwhelming majority of the American public asking what's happening with our nation's immigration system. Okay. And they see these pictures, they hear these sounds of these families being torn apart, and they're asking the question of, okay, why aren't we doing this in a different way? Why aren't Democrats and Republicans, Republicans and Democrats working together to get to a solution? And ultimately, and you know, Daniel, you would agree, I think, is that among conservatives, you know, faith leaders, law enforcement, business leaders, they're asking the questions of their members of Congress, their elected officials, the president that they voted for, what are you doing? We didn't sign up for this. So it's very easy for all of us to get very angry and frustrated and bitter about the situation. The situation is awful, but there's also an incredible opportunity that lies here, too.
With that knowledge, though, with that, you just said, you know, a lot of people are sort of trying to realize the immigration system more. And you know, one thing that makes me feel better as a reporter when I'm writing about asylum policy, for example, is when I talk to a person like Jackie Watson, who's an immigration lawyer here in town, and she says, I've been doing this for years, and I still don't get all the nuances. Yep. How difficult is it to take something that's so wonky, so detailed, so different from, say, the criminal justice system and explain to people exactly what it is that's going on? It's a civil offense, it's not a criminal offense. It's a misdemeanor, which I think is in the same category as entering illegally. The misdemeanor, it's, you know, like illegally transporting water lilies or something like that. You know, I mean, there was an immigration attorney that mentioned that in El Paso. Like, this is, if you compared it to the criminal justice system, this is very, very minor, right? So how is that sort of knowledge and that information process to the general public at large going, and how does that influence people's reactions to what's going on?
I think that the nation's immigration debate isn't about politics and policy, and we have a tendency to always talk about it that way. You just rattled off a gazillion different policy wrinkles to this really complicated system. Right. I think for the public, it's really a question about culture and values. So how do we help people understand why somebody is fleeing drug violence in El Salvador? How do we help them understand that it is a decision that any parent would make to take their child to safety? Sure. And then what is the values-based decision that the United States is making of whether or not to welcome and protect that family? And then you can get to the policy questions. Okay.
Congressman Vela, you mentioned something earlier about, you know, it's a case-by-case situation, but in all our work covering this issue, we've obviously heard that some folks, some parents, they didn't need fingerprints when other people needed fingerprints. Some people needed a background check. Some people were required to turn in a birth certificate. So there are several hundred folks that are still out there that haven't been reunited for one reason or another. What are you hearing when you ask, what's the difference between case A and case B? What is the reaction that you're getting?
We really haven't asked in that context. Okay. I think what you said a little bit earlier is that the complexity of the situation is so immense, you know, to the extent where when we're talking about, you know, the policy-specific issues in terms is it a misdemeanor or is it a felony and things like that. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, but I'm not an immigration lawyer, and I'm a member of Congress, and sometimes I sit back and wonder, hey, shouldn't you understand this better? Sure. Right? And the thing is, it's so complex. So what we have done is we have leaned on the lawyers in the system who know it very well. And I'm talking about from the standpoint of the case-by-case situation. On a broader context, and from a legislative standpoint, there are people in Congress who understand the issues like really well, in particular on the Democratic side of the aisle is Zoe Lofgren from California. I mean, there's she is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in Congress in terms of the entire immigration system and how that works. I wanted to go back to your first question that Daniel responded to, because I agree with Daniel, and what's happening inside the administration and whether we should expect this to ever happen again. I don't really think it's likely. I think we're in a church, so the way I'm seeing this play out in the administration, there are competing factions in the administration. Okay. And at the end of the day, when the policy was revoked, I think that the right faction won the day, and I think we're beginning to see them have more and more influence. We've seen it from the context of what the administration's doing with Mexico on trade. If you've noticed, the president's rhetoric about Mexico on the trade issue is a lot different now than it was 3 months ago. Okay. And so I think that's because there are people inside the White House that are beginning to achieve a degree of credibility with the president. I was with Commissioner McAleenan just this last week in my office, and we were talking specifically about the issue that Ali's talking about in terms of what's going on in Central America. And you have to remember, Commissioner McAleenan is a product of the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations. Sure. And for the first time out of this administration, because of the commissioner, I got a sense that there were people in there really beginning to focus on what's going on in Central America and trying to come up with a plan with respect to what can we do in Central America to make things better so that we don't have to deal with this.
So the reversal is, in your opinion, was it more of a PR move, or were there actually people that it tugged at their heartstrings and that's why they did it?
I think it was both. I mean, very clearly there was it was a PR nightmare, right, for the administration. But in that process, I think that the people I'm talking about, finally convinced the president that the only way out of this was to revoke the policy.
Okay. There's also the Attorney General and a lot of other folks that are for stronger immigration enforcement have argued the fact that when a family or even an individual seeks asylum, they usually they either abscond or they don't show up for their immigration hearings, and they just sort of kind of blend in. I've spoken to people in El Paso and Laredo where that is a fact. So Celina, I wanted to ask you, how prevalent is the problem of folks that seek asylum, they pass their initial credible fear exam, and then they just sort of disappear and work a job that's in the underground cash economy? I mean, how big of a problem is it that folks don't show up to their immigration proceedings?
You mentioned that immigration is a civil offense,
right,
and when we compare the civil system to the criminal system in terms of people showing up to court, getting bonded out or showing up to court, when you're talking about folks that are here seeking asylum, 95% of people are showing up to court. And compare that to the criminal justice system, the numbers are much, much lower. And so when we're talking about finding the least restrictive environment for families, they should be together, they should be in the community. There are people who have ankle monitors. I'm not advocating for that, but there are alternatives to detention, and people are showing up to court. So I think that's really something that's a fallacy that's been spread, but 95% of people are showing up.
Mr. Garza, obviously, taxpayer, saving taxpayers' money is a big concern for RSDs, the libertarians, however you want to identify yourself. It's been estimated that, for example, in Tornillo, Texas, everybody is familiar with what's going on out there, a small little farming town in West Texas. There was an immigration, some people call it a shelter, some people call it a detention center, but it's some people call it a tent city and compare it to a sort of Joe Arpaio sort of situation. But describe it as however you want. The reality is that there's capacity for nearly 4,000 people to be in this immigration shelter. And I think the cost, I've seen estimates anywhere from $400 to $700 per day per detainee. Talk a little bit about alternatives to detention and how much you can speak a language to, if people aren't passionate about immigration, everybody's passionate about saving money. So alternatives to detention, where are we on that? And do you think that there's ever going to be a possibility that like Ms. Moreno said, ankle monitors as opposed to actually detaining people inside tents or detention centers, whatever you call them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I consider myself to be just a common, ordinary person, right, with just a common sense.
Sure.
I don't have any exceptional intelligence. And so I sort of depend on people like the congressman to come up, with the policies, and so do other Americans, right? Let those in who would make America stronger, and keep those out who would do us harm. Essentially, right? There are fundamental, simple, common sense kind of approaches that we have to governance when it comes to this kind of issue. But it just seems like, because your first question was, will this happen again? Maybe that won't happen again, the zero tolerance policy, and they dial it back. But even if they dial it back, to these massive centers, and who knows if they're not keeping them indefinitely. Let's just say they're keeping the families together, but they're taking their sweet time, and we need to make sure that that's not happening either, right? The dial back has to be acceptable to a solution that I think as common everyday Americans we're satisfied with. Yes, we want to have a flexible market-based immigration system where folks are coming in and we're addressing market forces, but we also want security too, right? So it has to be a balance of both. And I think we fundamentally, I think what we're looking at is to have a system where folks that can come in, claim asylum, give them enough time where we are deliberate and can fact check. Are these people not human traffickers? Are they not going to do us harm? Are they not tied to terrorist groups? Or whatever it is, right? That they can get cleared. Don't do it so fast where you reject them outright, because you're speeding through this thing. But be deliberate and be responsible with the decisions that Americans have given you as the bureaucratic class, who have this responsibility.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying making it more efficient will make it less expensive.
Absolutely, it has to be that way. But also long term, we have to think about, let's get immigration reform done that is permanent, that is clear, that is simple, that people understand. Talk about the complexity of the problems. There are so many interests in the immigration debate. I can't keep up, and I'm the one who's sort of, in tune with this stuff. Sure. So the more efficient, the better, but it also has to be a flexible immigration system that accommodates for so many dynamics that are happening in America.
Congressman?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because just within the last, we were in Washington for 3 days this week, and within those 3 days, I had interest from the agricultural sector and from the manufacturing sector, and all of them were coming in, and from the labor sector, in fact, and all talking about how there was a great need for workers in all of these industries, right? Sure. And so, that's an argument for making sure we have good people coming in. On the standpoint of who's coming in and who's coming out, I would also add that in terms of enforcement, when you start putting so much of our border enforcement energy into everybody, even people like the mother and child that we spent 48 hours trying to unify in the last 2 days. Sure. What it does, our law enforcement resources are pretty limited as well, right? And so what that does is that keeps their focus away from where it needs to be, right, which is, the people that are bad, right? And so I think we really need to, rethink of that, and the approach needs to be a whole lot more targeted. Okay.
A question for
I was going to add one more thing now that you're turning to Ali and Christina, because they probably know the precise figures, but I think it's also important to remember that under the Obama administration, there was a pilot project with an alternative detention pilot project that was doing very, very well, okay, and that got scratched, and they probably you probably know what it cost and all that sort of stuff. So.
Thank you for helping me pivot to the Obama administration. Did the Obama administration separate families?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Under what circumstances?
When you saw, under the Obama administration, there were over 2 million people who were deported. A number of those folks were parents. Right. We saw when the unaccompanied minor crisis first really spiked in summer of 2014, while these were unaccompanied children, I think, quite frankly, President Obama, he set the wrong tone out of the gate. He talked about it as, enforcement. We had to enforce the law at the border, make sure that these children are not able to stay in order to deter more from coming. There was talk about, how do we clamp down on the system as opposed to understanding what's happening in Central America, much less the safety of the children when they arrive. So I think the Obama administration, while they eventually, over a course of a month or two, kind of reoriented their message, they set a narrative that Trump has taken and put on steroids. And now a lot of the policy things that they put into motion, I mean, I would also argue that the Obama administration, while they did a lot of great things in terms of immigration policy through executive action, and I'm not even talking about DACA, a lot of things, say, around the H-4 visa for the spouses of engineers. Okay. They did all these things in the last 6 to 12 months of their time in office, which made them a lot easier to unravel. So I just think that, at the end of the day, there's such tremendous pressure on Congress. And look, let's just be honest, under the current leadership of Congress, there's very little oversight, to put it mildly. Okay. So I think there's a lot of fixing that's going to need to be done.
Celina, if I could ask you the same question, I mean, is the criticism toward the Obama administration that he also separated asylum seekers under different circumstances, but the fact that he did it, do you think that's accurate? That's an accurate argument?
The family detention and the separation of families has been occurring pre-zero tolerance policy, absolutely. I think we have seen it to a whole other level, but the same issues that I was talking about with family detention have been, Malta filed a complaint back in 2014. We're still filing complaints on this same issue. And we're talking about people who, again, are fleeing unspeakable conditions. Sure. And when they show up to our borders, we're telling them that we're going to jail them and re-traumatize them. So the Obama administration is certainly guilty of that, but I don't think you can compare the two. I mean, you mentioned DACA, and just last night, one of our DACA clients came up to me and showed me a picture of how much hair that was falling out because the Trump administration is trying to overturn the Obama DACA policy through litigation. Okay. And so I don't think you can compare the two in the broader scheme of things.
Congressman, going back to the shelters, the detention is what you want to call them. Have you've been able to tour one of the facilities, correct?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So there's again, going back to the Tornillo example, there were some folks, progressive Democrats, that toured the facility, and they said, look, it's a tent, it's a bum move, they're out here, but they have air conditioning, they have 3 hots in the cot, they have somebody donated a soccer field. So what are the conditions inside? Because, and I think that goes to a lot of the criticism for the Trump administration and the Obama administration. I've been trying to get into certain shelters for as long as I've been reporting, and under Obama and under Trump, they were both very, very quiet, very, very hush hush. Immigration, it's an administrative thing, so you can't go on Pacer and try to look up something on the process. So with respect to the, I guess, the lack of information about what's going on inside, you've seen them. What are the conditions like inside these shelters?
Okay, so let's talk about, because there's all sorts of shelters and different sorts of facilities. Okay. And in particular, what I can do is focus on 2, and that is first, the Border Patrol facilities where detainees are first brought. And remember that with respect to unaccompanied minors, that they can only be held for 72 hours, at which point they have to go into Health and Human Services. The problem is that those Border Patrol stations are just that. They're Border Patrol stations that were intended to detain illegal immigrants, right, as they were being detained, but they were not meant to house minors and families, so they really have nowhere else to go. And so on that note, it's important to know that Commissioner McAleenan was very specific of wanting to come back, for example, to South Texas and go talk to some of our immigration rights groups down there, the Equal Voice Network and Lupe and the Catholic Charities, of course, and find out what is it that they think would work during that 72-hour period, right? Okay. And then, of course, the other facility I'm familiar with are the Southwest Keys facilities, in particular what Senator Merkley first brought to everybody's attention was...
This is the facility in Brownsville that used to be a Walmart, right?
It used to be a Walmart.
Okay, so I'm sure everybody's familiar with, yeah.
But what happened is Walmart built a new store about a mile away, a brand new store, so we had this big vacant building in the Southwest Keys, essentially purchased from Walmart. And you got to remember, and that was the other thing that I think astonished members of Congress when they went into that particular Southwest Keys facility, is that of the 1,500 children that were detained there, only about 70 or 80 of them were victims of the zero tolerance policy. The others were unaccompanied minors.
Right.
It was a population of unaccompanied minors that Southwest Keys deals with all the time.
Right.
And so, you know, Southwest Keys at that particular facility has to take care of 1,500 people. You have what I would refer to essentially as dorm rooms, about four children per room. They weren't bunk beds; they had each individual beds in the housing part of the section. There were classrooms, you know, and a lot of classrooms. We would take members of Congress into the classrooms where, you know, these kids were being, you know, taught different courses and things like that.
Did you get the feeling though, because and I mention this because some lawmakers and reporters as well, they got the feeling that it was somewhat staged for visitors to make it look a little bit, you know, less of a detention center and more.
I can't say that I got that feeling. Okay. I mean, for sure at the Border Patrol station, there's nothing staged about it because it was just a mess. Sure. Because there was, you know, hundreds of people in a very small, confined space. And really, if you remember back about 3 or 4 years ago when we had the first surge, you know, and they were literally having to use Border Patrol agent and administrative offices and put children in there. I'll never forget when I took Leader Pelosi. It was really a horrible sight because they had one child who they detected with some sort of they were concerned that the child might have a disease that could be spread, and this 4-year-old child was all alone in this office. And as we walked by, the child was just like banging on the window, and you know, it was a really, really awful experience. But so I think at the Border Patrol checkpoint, at the Border Patrol station, that's what the situation is like. At Casa Padre, which is the big Southwest Keys facility, I did not get the sense that things were staged. Okay. We also went to Casa Padre, was where the young children, the children that were 10 and under were, and teenagers that were pregnant were being housed there. We didn't get to see a whole lot of that facility, so it's hard for me to assess that.
So I mean, it's obviously very volatile, very, very tough issue, but a lot of people fall either on one side or the other. But it's fair to say that the folks that work at Southwest Key, even some of the Border Patrol agents, you know, we all know a lot, you know, being from the border, it breaks their heart doing what they're doing. But they're following policy, so I think that is something that might be missing in the conversation about whether it's policy or whether you're doing it because you really believe in doing it. But I wanted to also ask about the fact that the Trump administration has said, you know, if you want to seek asylum, do it at the port of entry, right? Do it the legal way instead of going in between the ports and violating, you know, the United States Code. But Debbie Nathan, a veteran journalist who's been covering this issue for a long time, she broke the story that at least in El Paso, CBP was planting themselves at the middle of the bridge, and they were turning people away that looked like they were from Central America, and they were asking them. I've been to Juarez several times since all this happened. I've never been asked for my passport before I go to the port of entry, but I've seen people ask if they have any sort of permission or anything. So there's some folks that say that is actually a violation of policy. Is it illegal for them to turn back asylum seekers in the middle of the bridge? I don't know. Celina, Ali, anybody want to weigh in on that?
My sense on it is that the reason that they were doing that was that they would say that there wasn't capacity to process people.
To be fair, sorry to interrupt, but to be fair, there have been also times where I've been waiting with families where CBP says, we don't have any room right now, but come back in 2 hours or wait 3 hours. And again, they have let them in after that time.
So this is the problem, is that this is a very opaque system. Okay. You know, we've heard reports that, yes, families have been turned away only to return, in essence, when the processing capacity opens, and we've seen articles where there's kind of informal waiting lines at ports of entry. We've also heard anecdotes where families are just, you know, they're never able to start that process. You know, it just gets back to this issue of accountability. This has been and this goes back all the way to the Bush administration, where you have a Department of Homeland Security that has been resourced to the level where they are, always trying to meet staffing requirements. There's a part of CBP that wants to eliminate background checks and lie detector tests because they have these staffing pressures. So when you have an agency that has been given tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, I mean, our immigration enforcement agencies, ICE, CBP, U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services, together are larger than all the rest of the federal law enforcement. So at the end of the day, DHS needs a much higher level of accountability so that, yes, we as a nation can not just abide by our values, but by our laws and make sure that people can seek asylum here.
Julián, if I can say something really quick, I think it's interesting also that when a side issue to this on DACA, I'm going to bring it back to what Ali is saying. On DACA, the president had proposed these 4 pillars. Right. And the first one was 1.8 million. Terrific. Terrific, right? 1.8 million slots for citizenships for these DACA recipients, which I thought was fantastic. Then, of course, the 25 billion for the wall, reallocation of the visas and the 3rd pillar. But the 4th pillar, Cato had estimated that there was going to be a 40% reduction in legal immigration. Right now, annually, there's 1.1 million folks that come in with green cards into America. And they would reduce that 40%, which would, of course, put much more intense pressure and induce illegal entry into the U.S. and, of course, overwhelm even more so whatever capacity we have now to process the folks that are seeking asylum. Which it's fascinating that you try to pass or get a policy advanced that would distort dramatically the inducement of illegal entry into America. It didn't make sense to us.
And even the cuts in the refugee numbers. Right. I mean, to go from 75 to 30,000, it's going to create the same pressures.
The same pressures, exactly. Induce more illegal entry.
So with respect to sort of vetting the people that we want in this country and the folks that we don't, CBS News, a lot of outlets, I got this from CBS News, a gentleman named Ramon Escobar, 47-year-old gentleman from El Salvador. He had been deported 6 times. And this isn't an ICE sort of sanctuary city issue. I mean, obviously he was flagged for deportation, he was removed, and he entered the country repeatedly. He allegedly is charged, or he's charged with allegedly killing 3 people, assaulting another 4 in California after he was not questioned by folks in Houston. And there's still a little sort of a cloud of mystery on why that happened, but he won an appeal from the immigration court on an asylum claim in 2016. How does the government make sure that doesn't happen again? Because this is the argument that people say, like, look, if 1 out of 1,000 people are coming over to do us harm, that means we can't let anybody in because we can't take that chance. So how does somebody like that slip through the cracks? How does somebody...
Well, I understand that the central argument to DACA was prosecutorial discretion. And prosecutorial discretion because we had limited resources to handle the whole swath of folks that were entering legally.
Well this I'm talking about the asylum process.
I understand that, but what I mean to say by that, because there's a corollary here. If you are focusing your attention on the criminal element, I think it could be much more effective actually at deterring that than trying to get everybody. El que mucho abarca poco aprieta, right? There's a saying in Spanish, don't swallow more than you can chew. And sometimes when it comes to immigration, the entry at times has put us over capacity. So focus on those folks that obviously are we know for a fact are the criminal element, the human traffickers, all these other things. And so what's happening is by, I guess, putting all these resources into family separation, DACA kids, you're actually taking the ball away from where you really should put your eye on.
Okay. We at family separations, obviously, they grabbed the headlines this summer. Celina and I were talking a couple days ago about this panel, and it seemed to me when I was in Houston covering the hearing on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, all of a sudden everybody was like, oh yeah, what happened to DACA? DACA was big news, and then the family separation sort of stole the thunder, so to speak. But it's still a very important issue, and it also falls under the umbrella of separating families. So I wanted to ask Celina, where are we with DACA? There's been several court decisions. The state of Texas, obviously a couple months ago now, they argued to end the program. The president said more than a year ago that he was ending it. He knew it's been stymied by 3 or 4 different court decisions. So can you give us a quick update on where we are with Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals?
Sure. So everybody remembers the Easter Sunday no DACA deal tweet by the president, and yes, September 5th, 2017, the president did end DACA, tried to rescind DACA. As you mentioned, a lot of court decisions around the country have said that the way that that happened was unlawful. Right. Here in Texas, Texas is leading an effort, Texas along with 9 other states, to end DACA, and they sued the Trump administration. MALDIF, on behalf of 22 Dreamers, we intervened in this case because we knew that the Trump administration, obviously if they want to rescind DACA, cannot be trusted to be the defendants and defend DACA.
Right. I believe that the General Counsel called it a sweetheart deal, right, between the state of Texas and the Trump administration.
It is a sweetheart deal, and so right after the state of Texas in May sued the Trump administration, the first thing that the state of Texas did was to ask for a preliminary injunction to block DACA temporarily. And in doing so, they're arguing that the argument, speaking of family values, their argument is that these young people are harming the state financially, that the DACA program is a magnet for illegal immigration. Sure. And what the judge in our case said that he was not going to block DACA temporarily, and that there would have to be a full trial on the merits. And so the state of Texas lost that injunction and has till the end of next month to appeal. So
we're still in this limbo period. And the judge, Judge Andrew Hanen, who was successful, or actually was Governor Abbott in his former role as the Attorney General, that it sued to end the broader DAPA. But it was the same judge that stopped that didn't grant the injunction. So, in your opinion, was it because the state of Texas waited too long? I mean, how could they prove irreparable harm if they waited 6 years to file a lawsuit?
And that's exactly what one of the arguments put forward by the Dreamers in this case, and the judge did recognize if this was such irreparable harm, why wait so long? It's been 6 years. Sure. The other thing that the judge talked about was seeing the balance of the equities, and what that means is how is this going to affect not only the parties involved, but the public interest. And you had Southwest Airlines, you had major companies come out talking about how bad this would be to end DACA for our economy, putting aside the family values aspect. And I think that made our Attorney General very uncomfortable. And you saw him kind of push back and go on TV and radio and make it seem that, oh no, DACA is not going, this case is not going to impact current DACA recipients, just future, and that's just either he's not aware of his case or that's just a misrepresentation, because ending DACA would in fact impact people like the client that I mentioned from last night.
Okay. I'm going to ask the Congressman one more question, and then we'll open it up to questions you guys want to start lining up. And again, with the questions, we ask for a question and be respectable and no booing or hissing. That's what we have Twitter for, is what I like to say. So let's keep the conversation going. Congressman, one last question. You know better than anybody here what the state of any sort of immigration reform, immigration bill that would grant some relief to the DACA kids and other aspects. Is there still hope, or do we have a better chance of betting that the Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl? I mean, what is the likelihood that anything is going to happen with immigration?
Well, between now and the year, you have a better chance that the Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl.
Okay. So there's nothing moving.
Towards next year, I think it depends on what happens in the general election.
Okay.
And I hesitate to say this because none of us really know, but I would suspect if Democrats were able to take a majority in the House and in the Senate, which is, it's kind of a 50-50 deal in both chambers, then we would be positioned to go back to at least something closer to what really President Bush proposed way back when, and what was proposed, it was 2013, 2014,
sure.
And begin to address that. And the interesting thing is, what would the president do? Because given his rhetoric on border wall funding and no DACA relief and just his overall attitude towards immigrants in general, You know, but the one thing is that this president is very unpredictable. And he would have to face, he'd be facing an election in 2020. You know, so you know, maybe you might have a chance that something would get done, but it's hard to say.
Okay.
One thing that has given me, you know, I've been probably one of the chief antagonists with respect to this presidency, but one thing that has given me a glimmer, and that's all it is a glimmer of hope, is that what I've seen the administration do with respect to our relation to Mexico in the last 2 months, not that I necessarily agree that leaving Canada out of a trade deal is a good thing.
He softened his tone.
But at least we're not hearing the kinds of things about Mexico, we haven't heard the kinds of things about Mexico in the last 60 days that we were hearing for the 2 years before that.
Okay.
And, you know, if June of next year you had Democratic majorities, it may not even take a Democratic majority. I mean, you know, given the makeup of the Senate and the overall collegiality on that side, you know, that you know, there's a possibility that some deal could be done next year.
Okay, great. Yes, ma'am, your question, thank you.
Hi, my name's Katana. When I was younger, my uncle was deported, so I've seen the effects of family separation. My cousins had to grow up without their father, and that was hard to watch. Congressman, I want to thank you for your work this past year in protecting DACA dreamers. Could you tell us what you're going to do next in Congress to protect those dreamers further and further those protections to undocumented immigrants? And how will you prioritize fixing our broken immigration system? And how soon into the next Congress will you introduce legislation?
Well, I think, at least on the Democratic side, I think there's almost unanimous support for pushing immigration reform. But the reality is that we've, ever since I've gotten elected, we've been in the minority. And so the way the system works is, you know, we just don't have the votes to push our proposals through. That's why we're hopeful that we'll win the majority in November. And then at that point, at least, I mean, I can speak for myself, and I think many other of my colleagues, immigration reform would be front and center. But the one thing, you know, I ran for Congress in 2012, and when I ran, and then I was pretty well connected in terms of I knew other members of Congress because over time they were friends. In fact, I tell people that I ran for Congress because I got tired of having to contribute to Congressman Cuellar. But you know, when you first run for Congress, you think you're going to be able to go in and move mountains. But then you realize when you get there, wait a minute, there's 435 other members, and then, oh, wait a minute, you know, you're one of 193 currently, or 194 Democratic members in the minority, and the process just moves very, very, very slowly. The only thing I can say is that all of this time has given me time to kind of go back and do what I did you know, when I was younger and read history and things like that. And as I've read the you know, recent biographies on Washington and Hamilton and currently Ulysses S. Grant, our system has always been like this. If you take a look at any, administration, any session of Congress, the issues aren't always the same. But you know, you go back to like what was happening in the post-Civil War and the Reconstruction efforts. Our system, I think it's still the best system in the world, but it's a very tangled web.
Thank you, Congressman. To his point, we covered the Texas legislature heavily at the Texas Tribune, but I remember talking to former Congressman Pete Gallego, who served in both in Washington and here in Austin. He said, if you think things move slowly in Austin, try to, you know, you should come to D.C. No thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'd like to hear y'all's take on Beto's position on DACA and the border, and also how well positioned is he to make real change, and then the long-term viability of those changes if he's successful in making them, like basically the effectiveness of his approach long-term.
Congressman O'Rourke, well, he's got to win first, I think, to entertain some of those thoughts. But if he is successful,
I mean, again, to your point,
Yeah.
Congressman, you know, you can promise things, but the reality is a lot harder. So, Mr. Garza, whoever wants to chime in on this.
Well,
you go first.
Yeah. Well, I can say, you know, with all due respect to those on the left, they blew it when Obama had the House and the Senate and the White House, and they focused their attention on other priorities. I mean, I understand
they went
that
all in on healthcare, right?
they went all in on healthcare and some other issues and cap and trade. And I mean, you can make the case that it's going to be front and center, and I believe you when you say that. But that's not history, right? And so I was really encouraged by President Trump actually softening on the position. But I don't think Beto O'Rourke is going to make a difference. Now, that's just an observation. You know, obviously, he's going to be more friendly towards immigration reform and DACA reform than Senator Cruz will be. But he won't have the power or the levers of the machine to make it happen if they don't get those kind of majorities that the congressman is talking about. But yeah, I mean, there's intent, and then there's historically what you did when you had the opportunity. And I'll just tell you, the Democrats blew it.
You mind following up?
Yeah, I got yeah. Just want to get just any questions.
Because I don't necessarily disagree on the fact that it was something that could have been addressed between 2008 and 2010 when Democrats had the White House, Senate, and the House. That was our best opportunity to get something done, and it didn't get done. But on the question of Beto, just very generally, and not to get partisan here or anything like that, but I was elected with Beto. You know I am, right? I was elected with Beto. I've known Beto. And for me, not only on the issue of immigration, but on the issue of U.S.-Mexico relations, on the issue of what it's like living on the border, even during the Obama administration, you know, there's only 9 of us who represent districts along the U.S.-Mexico border. That's 9 out of 435. And
9 out of across the four border states.
I'm talking about 9 on the southern border. Yeah, you know, and there's a whole lot on the northern border, but you know, the U.S.-Mexico border gets maligned the most for sure. To me, having Beto's voice in the United States Senate is one of the best things that could happen for those of us who really care about the border. But it's true, you know, even being 1 out of 100 senators, you still have 99 other senators to deal with. I mean, I think even President Obama and President Trump and President Bush would tell you, you know, they get elected president, but then they have to deal with the House and the Congress, and then they have to deal with the bureaucracy, right? So it's a challenge nonetheless.
All right, we'll shift gears. You guys go to see Willie Nelson if we want to talk about our work a little bit more. So, yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Samantha Grosso. I'm an identity and immigration reporter with the Daily Dot. I just came from the one-on-one with Juan Sanchez, the CEO of Southwest Key, and he characterized himself and Southwest Key as kind of innocent in this role within the family separation crisis, if you want to call it. How, you know, what were we going to do with these children if we weren't going to take them? And he was really upset with the criticism that he's profiteering off the backs of, you know, sheltering these children. So I wanted to know what your positions were on, you know, that kind of analysis. If you felt that they're, like Southwest Key is really as, you know, innocent as he was saying they are, or if he really plays like a stronger, if they really play a stronger role in the crisis at large.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. Again, you know, are folks like the people that run Southwest Key, are they doing something to further what some people call a problem, or are they thrust in this role and they're doing the best they can?
I mean, I went to the same panel just before this. I was kind of curious what he was saying, what he would say. I mean, look, Southwest Key did not create this crisis. You know, the Trump administration and some very specific people within the Trump administration created this crisis. And there are good people throughout HHS, throughout DHS, throughout organizations like Southwest Key that are doing their best to address this tragedy that these families are facing. And I'm not going to, and I'm not, you know, I don't know the folks at Southwest Key, but I can say that I feel confident saying that there are folks there who are trying to figure out how to protect these children. And I think that, yes, we as the public should be holding the organizations that our tax dollars are paying to deliver a service. We should hold them accountable. But ultimately, in this case, we should be holding the policymakers who created this crisis the most accountable.
Celina, do you want to chime in on that?
I think what I'll say is, similarly, I think because of all this outrage, and you're starting to see the public speak out, and when, just an example on going back to family detention in Hutto, even though Williamson County, not too far from where we're at now, they've been operating contracts with ICE and with a private prison corporation for a long time. And I think finally you saw, because of the public outrage, Williamson County voted to say, we are not going to be that middleman anymore. And I think if we continue to have this public outrage, we'll start seeing that across the board.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. My name's Sam Lee. I'm a master's student here at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, where I'm studying migratory policy. My question is about Mexico's role in migration here. Back in 2000, when border apprehensions peaked, about 98% of those were from Mexico. And when a lot of you commented on that, demography has changed a lot, where the majority are now from Central America. And with that change has come a change in Mexico's policies and their role as not only as a sender, but as a transit corridor and as a receiving country for migrants. Can you comment a little bit on where Mexico's role is on bettering U.S. immigration policy?
Are they doing a good job?
I can say that there was a study that just came out that since 2010, only 35% of those coming illegally are actually from south of the border on the Western Hemisphere, which means there's been a dramatic shift of illegal entry into America from other continents and other countries. But also, I think, the famous, now we're at zero net, from Mexico. But it has a lot to do with the precipitous fall of the birth rate in Mexico to begin with. The STEM fields have blown up. Graduates from El Tecnológico, Guadalajara, Ciudad de Mexico. So engineers, mathematicians, there's a lot of development, the economy has boomed. People are moving from the rural areas into the cities. So Mexico's become more urbanized. So what that means is that you're getting more of the middle class expansion and less of that push factor from Mexico because of the jobs and opportunities that are being created.
But the transit point is still mainly through Mexico. So is Mexico doing enough to stop Central Americans from coming?
Sorry.
Right. So I mean, I think that was the question. We have some money going to Central America from Merida, and we have some sort of influence and back and forth about whether Mexico is doing enough to secure its own border or to apprehend Central Americans and say, no, you're here illegally, go back before they get to the United States. So is Mexico doing enough?
Over the last 4 or 5 years, what Mexico has done is that they have put into place along their southern border a visa program. So in essence, somebody can enter from a Central American country and work in Mexico and return. Okay. That has actually helped quite a bit. The U.S. has paid the Mexican government, and this is before the recent news of about 2 weeks ago in the past, to beef up their own security. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a regional challenge, and we have to address it as such. And that means that we need to have solutions that make sense in Central America, in Mexico, and in the U.S. And impressively, none of us are doing a good job at all right now.
Okay. Folks, I apologize. This clock says that we are out of time, but we're happy to entertain questions here after we get off. But as far as with respect to the venue, we're out of time. But thank you guys so very much for spending your time with us again. Appreciate it. Thank you.